Alright, we're going to talk about our guide mount, our guide tongue. Now, in many cases, a lot of builders will keep it flush with the bottom of the chassis, and a lot of times that does work. I very rarely do it this way, but it does work, and then you can shim your guide and adjust the height, with some shims, and everything works fine. In this case, I don't think it's going to work. I think I'm going to do my design that I did on my prior beach racer, but we'll just check and see. So one of the main things that's going to affect, where you mount your guide mount is your wheel and tire diameter. Like in this case, I'm using, the 22s from Paul Gauge as we list in our rules of the tires we're going to use for this series, and that makes this front end pretty tall. If we were to use lower profile tires, and we could have well got away with mounting it flush with the chassis. But as you can see here, as I move this around, that there's quite a distance there, and I still could probably get away with stacking some shims. It's just me. I like to be a little bit more precise. As you can see here on the other beach racer, I just ended up fabricating my own guide tongue to get the height that I really wanted. So that's just me. But you probably still could get away with doing the shims here if you wanted to. And what I like to do to determine that is I have an old guide here, and all I've done is I've taken braid, installed the braid, I super glued the braid down just to make sure it's flat, and I just use that as a guide. So that's the one thing that affects the height. Your fabrication there is just testing it like this. Like I said, you could shim it. You have plenty of room here at the top to secure it. I'm just going to go a different way. And then there's the distance of the guide out front, which a lot of people, they will tell you the further the better. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Except in our series, as you can see, the guide must be tucked in inside the body. It can't stick way out in front of the body like some people do. And this is determined from model to model. So what do? You put your body up here and you check, and you can adjust your guide back and forth, making sure that you'll have plenty of clearance, that you're not hitting the inside of the body. And you can adjust this guide to get it as far forward as possible without rubbing the interior of the body. Once you get that, you have a great idea of how long you have to make your guide mount. And I've just decided that we're going to fabricate our own guide tongue. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a mount for it to attach to. So I'm going to use some K&S 8240, and that's a 0.32 by 1/4 inch. And I'm going to put a strap right here. So we'll cut and measure, and we'll solder that in place. And then once that's in place, then we're going to mount our guide tongue. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and drill it out. I mean, it's fabrication, it's scratch building, so why not? Okay, the first step in our fabrication is we have our guide here, and we're going to measure the diameter here of the post. Yeah, 4.75 at the threads. That's where I usually measure, right there, 4.74, which is going to mean probably about 3/16. And we can measure that, and yeah, that's just about right. So even if it's a little tight, then we can adjust this hole just a little bit for the perfect fit. So anyway, this is, like I said, this is the 8241. This is the 0.32 by 1/2 brass strip, and that's what we're going to make it out of. So now we're going to measure here across, find our center line, and we're going to drill our hole. Okay, so finding our center is pretty easy. K&S brass is pretty dead accurate at a 1/2 inch. I usually use my caliper. You can use a ruler. 6.35, what you're looking for. That would be your center. Then you could just take your caliper you can just give it a little scratch mark there. Then then you can draw a line, if it helps you so you can see a little bit better. And then after we've done that, just a good old-fashioned center punch. Get right here in the middle, just like I've done. Give it a pop, and now you're ready to drill. As far as the distance from there is concerned, I just used the drill bit from the edge of the brass. Then I know I have enough material to do so. So that's just how I do it. Now we're going to go ahead, put our drill bit into the drill press, get it drilled out. And there we have it. I just usually secure it with a simple clamp like this. Holds it pretty well along with your hand there. And we've drilled it out. And like I said, I've just got a good old-fashioned Central Machinery Harbor Freight drill press, low cost. I'm not trying to make a living with it. I'm just building slot cars. Does the job. Okay, so now we have that drilled. We're looking good, but obviously it doesn't fit the guide yet. We have some trimming to do with this brass. Now, you could sit here and you could do this by sight. I've done it many times until you can get it to fit. But let me give you a little tip. So when you're ordering brass parts like this is from WRP, these guide tongues like this, they work fantastic as a template. So we're talking about tools here, and all the tools it takes to get things done. Well, this is one of them. So just order an extra, keep it on the side. It'll make life a lot easier for you. And then once you have one of these, then you can kind of just go around it, like that. And now you know where you have to trim. So you can trim this excess any way you want. You can go over to your belt sander, get a lot of this bulk off of here. Then you can fine tune it with a Dremel, with a milling bit, or you can just use a flat file and do it that way. So all you have to do is just sand, and then while you're doing it is, as always, just test fit until you have it right where you want it. Okay, we've sanded this part here at the very front, and now the guide will go in. But the second part is your guide travel. So when you're fabricating right here, these edges, this side and that side, when the guide goes to one side or the other, where you stop sanding or where you sand is going to dictate how much guide travel that you're going to have. So if you want more, then sand a little bit more, and that's what we're going to do. Okay, so I've sanded on a little bit, and here's the amount of guide travel I have so far. The easiest way to do is just put it on your guide, kind of line it up with your chassis. Gives you a good idea of how far out your travel is going to be. Yeah, this is pretty good for what we do. If you want a full 90, you want more, then just keep sanding these areas here until you get the amount of guide travel that you want. Alright, so you can see we installed the strap. Like I said, that wasn't really a big task there. Just cut and measure. Gave it some solder. It's nice and strong there. Now we have our guide inside the tongue. We're going to go back to putting the body on the chassis. And now we can adjust this, making sure we have plenty of that clearance, no rubbing on the inside, and not protruding out from the front. That's just the way we like to do it. Then you can take the body off, and now right here you can simply put a mark, and that lets you know where you can trim this, and then we can solder it, and it'll be the right length. So we made that first mark to give us an idea of the distance, but one thing we can't forget is we're slightly going to bend this guide tongue, and that might shorten it up. So I put it here on the setup block, And as you can see, the distance that we have to deal with. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to cut this just a little bit longer. All right, and then we're going to come back and we're going to take a look at how much we have to bend, and then we'll start the bending process to get this guide tongue nice and flat. All right, so what I've done is there's our original line that we measured before. I added about 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more, and that's where I can cut this material off so that we can temporarily mount it to our guide strap back there and figure out our angle. All right, this is the best way for me to describe this for you. Remember that right here is the original mark that we made when we measured the first time. Then I've went 1/4 inch past that, as we just talked about, to compensate for the bend, and I drew a line there. I even cut that, a little proud of that, as you can see, and that's fine. It's easier to take away than it is to add to. Now for the second series of bends, I went about 1/4 inch from this original, and this is what I would call bend number 2. Then I went 1/2 inch, and this would be the bend point number 1. You can bend these a couple of different ways. I used the lines. I used my square here to make sure that they were straight, and those are my guide. So I'll show you a couple different methods. So method number 1 is pretty much the most accurate. I just take the handle portion, my square, I bring it up here, I put the brass in there at the line, and I make sure it's flush, and we know we have alignment. So when you're wanting to make sure it's just absolutely perfect, well, that's about as close as you can ask. All right, method number 2, using your big pliers like this. If you don't want to go through the time of setting that up, you can use these, align it with the line, and bend it by hand. Okay, but unless you're very, very comfortable doing so, take the time to set it up in the vise and get it aligned, because sometimes you'll make it crooked, and you may not want that. It might still work, just doesn't look very good. So yes, if you're in a hurry, you can do this, but I would stick to the vise method. Okay, that's just about perfect. Now yes, you can see that there is a gap here, and that's perfectly fine. First of all, with the alligator clip back here, clipping this to it, it's not quite perfect at an angle whenever I bent it. So it's not completely parallel yet. So once I solder it back here, then we can bend this down a little bit to get it parallel. It'd be just perfect. Between sanding the tires, reducing the diameter a little bit when we true them, and maybe adding a shim, we should be solid gold. One more thing I'd like to show you is, you'll notice that I have this mounted on the top of the strap instead of at the bottom when we were measuring it. That's because when you make these bends, you can check it both ways. So before you put this in the vise to flatten it out or to increase it, try it on the top or the bottom first and see where it goes. In this case, I didn't have to do any changes with the bend. I simply chose the mounting point on the top of the strap instead of the bottom. All right, and there we have it. It's installed there. Just a real simple solder job right there. All you need to do is just use like I was showing you earlier, just use a alligator clip to hold it in place and make sure that it's aligned in the center. And how do you do that? Well, with your caliper or a ruler, really easy to find center. You'll get that done. And there we go. Now, because we haven't put our secondary support in here, you can still bend this and move it and give it some slight adjustments before you put that mount in there. We'll get to that in the next part. But we're getting there. Now all we have left to do is this support up front to strengthen this just a little bit more. Then we've got our body mount system we're going to put in. Very, very easy. And we're going to add a couple more rails here on the side going back to the tube back there, just because we can, to add a little bit more support. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this installment. I know it was a little long. What can I say? That's just me. But always look forward to your comments. And by the way, really excited to see a lot of new faces jumping in the scratch building fray, building your own slot cars. Not all of you are joining our series of races. I don't care about that. I just think it's fun to see you guys getting involved and picking up the ye old iron and getting after it. So that's really fun to see. But like I said, always look forward to your comments, and we'll see you in the next part.